So, you want to own a Viking longship. Oars biting into gray water, a carved dragon head cutting through fog, 60 men pulling in rhythm while the sail snaps taut behind them. Here's a real number. In 1962, archaeologists raised a Viking ship from the seabed at Skoldilev in Denmark, and when they finally finished reconstructing it, they discovered something the sagas never bothered to mention. That single trading vessel had required the wood of roughly 11 acres of forest to build. Not decoration, structure. Somebody owned that forest, or bought it, or took it. Somebody paid the shipwrights, fed the crew, and covered the loss when the whole investment sank in a storm off a coast nobody had charted. This is what owning a longship actually looked like from the inside. Not the saga's version, the shipwrights bill. So let's build one from the keel up and follow the silver all the way to the horizon. Start with the number that should stop you before you spend a single piece of silver. In 1997, a team of Danish archaeologists and boat builders set out to construct an exact working replica of one of the Skoldilev ships, a vessel they named Havhingsten, the Sea Stallion. It took them 4 years, and modern estimates for the timber, iron, and specialist labor involved in building a full-sized Viking longship put the cost, once you translate 9th and 10th century Scandinavian silver into working days, somewhere in the range of a full year or more of an ordinary farmer's total output. That's before you've hired a single rower. A longship was not a boat. It was the single largest capital purchase most Norse households would ever make. Bigger than land, bigger than livestock, sitting entirely on faith that the sea would give back more than it took. Now be precise about what you're actually buying, because Viking ship hides 3 completely different businesses wearing the same hull shape. There's the Nar, a broad, deep-bellied cargo ship built for hauling grain, timber, and livestock across open ocean, slow and stable, the actual workhorse of Norse trade. There's the longship proper, the Langskip, narrow, shallow-drafted, built for speed and raiding, able to land on a beach with no harbor at all and be rowed up a river too shallow for anything else afloat. And there's the largest class, the Drekar, the dragon ships, that carried 30 pairs of oars or more and existed mostly to make kings look powerful. You are not buying a dragon ship. Almost nobody did. You're buying something closer to a mid-sized longship, the kind that shows up again and again in the archaeological record because it was the one an ordinary chieftain or wealthy farmer could actually afford, and even that will nearly break you. The money. Norse economies before around 1000 AD ran mostly on weighed silver, not minted coin, and the honest unit for comparing value across this whole business is livestock, because a cow's worth stayed roughly stable even when silver didn't. Sources describing later Norse and Icelandic law codes price a milking cow at a fixed number of silver units, used as the baseline for settling debts and fines, and that cow price is our ruler for this episode, the same way a laborer's day wage was the ruler for Rome. Everything gets measured in cows, not coins, because coins got clipped, melted, and argued over, and a cow just stood there being worth what it was worth. Building the hull starts with the tree, and this is where the Skoldilev discovery matters most. Norse shipbuilders didn't saw planks from logs the way later carpenters did. They split oak trunks along the grain in radial sections, and modern reconstruction projects for ships like the Sea Stallion needed several dozen mature oak trees, each one 200 years old or more, straight-grained and free of knots, harvested from managed woodland that someone had to own and protect for 2 centuries before it was ready to be cut down for your boat. You are not just buying wood. You're buying 2 centuries of somebody's ancestors having the patience not to build anything with that forest. Then comes the iron. Every plank on a longship overlaps its neighbor, clinker-built, fastened edge to edge with iron rivets, and a full-sized longship needed well over 1,000 of them, each hand-forged by a smith, each one a separate object that had to be right or the hull would leak the ship into the seabed on its maiden voyage. Add the mast, carved from a single straight pine trunk. Add the sail, woven from wool, and this detail rarely makes it into the documentaries. A Viking sail large enough for a proper longship required the wool of an entire flock, spun and woven by hand, and modern experimental archaeologists who tried reproducing a Viking-style sail from scratch found it took longer, in total person-hours, than building the hull itself. The most labor-intensive object on your ship was not the wooden part, it was the fabric. Now the staff, because a longship is nothing without hands to pull it. A mid-sized longship needed a crew of roughly 30 to 60 rowers, depending on size, and here's the detail that separates this business from almost every other one in this series. Your crew mostly weren't slaves, kings, and mostly weren't wage laborers. They were free farmers, often relatives, neighbors, or men bound to you by oath and obligation, who rode in exchange for a promised share of whatever the voyage brought back: plunder, trade profit, or land. This arrangement had a name across the Norse world: the leidang, a system in which local communities were legally obligated to supply ships, men, and equipment for the king's fleet, recorded in later Scandinavian law codes that specify exactly how many households owed how much toward a single ship's crew and gear. You weren't just an owner, you were the center of a small, mandatory economy, and every man on your benches had a legal claim on what came home in the hold. Feeding that crew at sea is its own quiet math problem. A longship had almost no space below decks, no cargo hold in the way a nar had one, which meant provisions for a voyage of any real length had to be rationed with brutal precision. Dried fish, hard bread, butter packed in barrels, and water, all of it competing for space with the men who had to row it. Run out at sea and your crew starves before you reach anywhere worth reaching. Every extra day at sea was a bet against your own stores. So by now you've spent 2 centuries of forest management, 1,000 hand-forged rivets, an entire flock's wool, and you've bound 30 to 60 free men to you with promises you haven't kept yet. Time to see how a longship actually earns. The first stream, and the one the sagas love most, is raiding. The Vikings' own chroniclers and the churchmen who wrote about them agree on this much. A successful raid on an undefended coastal monastery or trading town could return silver, cattle, captives taken for ransom or sold into slavery, and portable wealth, chalices, jewelry, coin hoards, worth many times the cost of the voyage that fetched it. The sack of Lindisfarne in 793 became famous precisely because it worked, and worked spectacularly for the raiders who did it. But raiding has a brutal payment structure hiding underneath the plunder. You don't get paid unless you win, and you don't get paid at all if your ship is wrecked, your crew is killed defending a beach, or the target turns out to have walls and soldiers instead of monks. Every raid was a single, undiversified bet with your entire capital riding on one afternoon. The second stream, less glamorous and far steadier, is trade. The Nar-style cargo vessels and longships pressed into carrying duty between raids moved furs, walrus ivory, amber, slaves, and Scandinavian iron east and west, returning with silver, silk, wine, and glassware from as far away as the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. Archaeologists have pulled Arabic silver coins, dirhams, out of Viking Age hoards buried across Scandinavia by the tens of thousands. Physical proof that Norse traders were plugged into a trade network stretching down the Russian rivers to Baghdad. Trade paid less per voyage than a successful raid, but it paid every voyage, win or lose, because nobody was trying to kill you on the way to a market. The third stream is one modern retellings underplay completely: mercenary service. Norse warriors sold their fighting ability directly to foreign courts, most famously in the Byzantine emperor's Varangian Guard, an elite unit recruited heavily from Scandinavian and Rus warriors who served as the emperor's personal bodyguard for generations, paid in steady wages and a share of imperial spoils that dwarfed what most raiding voyages ever brought home. If you owned a ship and commanded loyal men, you weren't just a raider or a trader. You were a defense contractor with a boat, and the best-paying client in the known world sat in Constantinople. The fourth stream is transport for hire and, quietly, ransom. A longship that could land almost anywhere was valuable to anyone who needed men or goods moved fast and without a harbor, and captured nobles, monks, or wealthy hostages taken in a raid were frequently worth more alive and ransomed back than killed or sold. A grim but reliable line item that shows up repeatedly in the chronicles written by the very churches paying to get their people back. Add the streams together: ratings violent jackpots, trades steady returns, mercenary contracts with an empire, and ransom money squeezed from the wealthy and the church, and the longship stops looking like a war machine and starts looking like what it actually was: a single piece of capital equipment flexible enough to be a warship, a cargo hauler, and a passport into foreign courts, depending entirely on what the season and the opportunity called for. Now here's what breaks it. The first threat is the one every saga eventually admits to: the sea itself. A longship's shallow draft and light construction, the very features that let it beach on any shore and outrun heavier ships, also made it dangerously vulnerable in open ocean storms. And the archaeological and documentary record is full of entire expeditions that simply vanished. Ships and crews never accounted for, no wreckage, no survivors, no story, just an investment that stopped existing somewhere over open water. The second threat is the leidang system turning against you. The same legal obligation that gave you 30 free rowers when the king called for a fleet could also be called against you, seizing your ship, your men, and your season's plans for a campaign you never chose, and that might get every one of them killed, serving somebody else's ambition. The third threat is retaliation. Coastal kingdoms did not stay undefended forever. As the decades passed, England, Francia, and other targets built fortified towns, standing garrisons, and eventually paid tribute, Danegeld, specifically to make raiding not worth the trouble, and later organized fleets and shore defenses that turned once easy targets into fights your crew might not win. The business model that worked brilliantly in 793 was measurably harder and bloodier by 950. The fourth threat ended the entire golden age of the business, and like Rome's baths, it wasn't a single battle. It was Christianization and consolidation. As Scandinavian kings converted and centralized power through the 10th and 11th centuries, the old model of independent chieftains outfitting their own raiding ships gave way to organized royal fleets and taxed trade, and the Norman conquest of 1066, itself led by descendants of Viking settlers in France, is often marked by historians as a symbolic closing point. The last time a fleet built on this old raiding logic changed the map of a kingdom. After that, the ships kept sailing. The business that built them from scratch, season after season, chieftain by chieftain, quietly stopped being how anyone got rich. So, knowing all of it, the 11 acres of oak, the 1,000 rivets, the flock's worth of wool, the Varangian silver, was this ever a good business? Run the good season first. You outfit a mid-sized longship with loyal, oath-bound crew, hit an undefended coastal target early in raiding season before word spreads and defenses harden, come home with silver, captives, and portable wealth worth many times your outlay, and still have a working ship to trade with or hire out for the rest of the year. A good season on a longship could make a farmer's family wealthy for a generation in a single voyage. Now the bad season. A storm you didn't see coming takes the ship and every man on the benches, and there is no insurance, no salvage, nothing but an empty beach and a debt owed to the households who supplied your crew under the leidang and now want their sons back or their silver instead. Or the raid you planned meets soldiers instead of monks, and the men who rowed you there in good faith die on a beach they never should have landed on. Or the king calls in the leidang obligation the same year you needed your ship for trade, and your season's plans belong to someone else's war. That's the honest ledger behind the dragonhead and the drumbeat of oars. Not a story about fearless raiders sailing for glory, but a story about a man who sank 2 centuries of forest, a flock's worth of wool, and 30 families' sons into a single hull, and spent every season betting all of it on a coastline, a storm, and a king's ambitions he didn't control, in a business that made some men legendarily rich and left just as many names remembered only on a rune stone raised by the family that never saw them come home.